Welcome back to the Cyber Resiliency Summit. I'm Christophe Bertrand, Principal Analyst here at theCUBE Research. In this segment, we are going to be talking to Vijay Ramachandran. Vijay, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. So my name is Vijay. I run product management at Broadcom/VMware, focus on the core infrastructure, which includes compute, storage, and networking. Just to give you a bit of my background, I've been at VMware for a long time, and I used to head up product management for storage previously and data protection and that side of the business. And after the Broadcom acquisition, I took on responsibility for the entire core infrastructure, including compute and networking side of things.
Perfect, so well-rounded experience. Well, I definitely love the space. That's also my background, so we're gonna geek out a little bit.
All right.
But before we go into too much detail here, I'd like to ask you your perspective on, first of all, why you're here at the Cyber Resiliency Summit. I mean, what do you see in the market that has fundamentally changed? Is it the attackers? Is it the infrastructure to respond to the attacks? What's your take and what have you seen?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting question because to be honest, I'm kind of fairly new to the whole cybersecurity world as well. And what I've learned in the last few years that I've sort of, been in the space, that, the nature of cyber attacks have changed dramatically. And so to answer your question, it's both the nature of attacks as well as what needs to get protected, whether it's infrastructure or different components within the infrastructure. And, at least from my perspective, what used to be backup and disaster recovery, that used to be the protection against, cyber attacks for many enterprises, and file scanning, right? But if you sort of fast forward, last 4 years, the attacks have become a lot more sophisticated. As you may know, there are attacks that happen in memory where there's no files involved. And previously, the legacy file-based scanning also doesn't take into account some of the behavioral aspects of the attack. And so, what is fascinating for me and also what's interesting for me is that, as an infrastructure provider in Broadcom, we have to sort of evolve our infrastructure, our protection, to ensure that we not only look at, the legacy way of protecting against attacks, but also, keeping up to date with the new ways of protecting against attacks. And so that's what we do at Broadcom.
Right, so it's a very interesting job you have because you're looking at it from sort of the 360 view of the infrastructure, having sort of the data part, the infrastructure piece, the virtual machines, and of course the mechanisms to respond to that.
That's right.
And we'll talk about that. So the attacks can be multiple. So just to break it down again, what you're telling me is, well, it used to be that people would try to infect files, and well, that's great. We would get the backups and snapshots and get back on track. Well, now that's different. They're going after the actual backups themselves. They're going after the microcode. They're going after, you mentioned in-memory attacks, but there are so many other dimensions. Social engineering with just stealing, the access to system and then wiping the data or leaking it, whatever the case may be. So given that you are in a couple of accounts worldwide, you have a pretty big footprint, to say the least. What do you think about the NIST framework as maybe a common language to approach this problem, and what are you doing specifically from your standpoint with your platform?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually love the NIST framework because it addresses, or at least it tries to build a framework that looks at all aspects of the infrastructure, starting off cyber resiliency, starting all the way from protect to recovery, detection, recovery. And so as we sort of look at what do we need to do to make sure that our platform continues to be the most resilient and the most secure platform, private cloud platform in the market, we actually look to the NIST framework to make sure that we have addressed all aspects of cyber, both not just protection, but also recovery. And so, we have products and solutions across the board for detecting attacks, for hardening our platform, the core platform, as well as, in the unfortunate case that somebody does get attacked, we have solutions to recover as quickly as possible, and more importantly, in the most secure way as possible. And we can talk about that more over the course of this discussion. But to answer your question, the NIST framework actually works perfectly well for us because we follow it to the T.
Right, and I think the latest version of the NIST framework also has a
Governance as well.
Component, which is, I think, very key, and maybe will be something we can discuss when we talk about how you've unified some of the components to maybe help further the ability to manage the overall process and workflow. So is it fair to say that, and I'd like to, well, that's what I like to say, so I think it's fair, but I'd like your opinion.
Yeah.
I think disaster recovery is dead. I think now, if we live in a world of cyber recovery and cyber resiliency, if you can recover from a cyber event, and I'm going to keep it very open to what it could be, because you don't really know what it will be and when it will be, it's just going to happen at some point. To me, traditional mechanisms and workflows actually do not work. You may not know what a good copy of data is. You may not know what to recover, when to recover it, if you can even recover it. So is it a different world we live in from a disaster recovery now? Should we be talking about more exclusively cyber recovery as the key operative word here?
It's definitely the key operative word, but I'll characterize it slightly differently. I wouldn't say that disaster recovery is dead. Disaster recovery is still an important piece of the puzzle, except the solution that we have, that ourselves and as well as other vendors have developed, have expanded beyond disaster recovery as a primary use case. So what's top of every CIO's mind is cyber attack and cyber recovery. And so as we look at solutions that previously used to provide disaster protection, those same solutions can now be expanded and enhanced tremendously to provide cyber resilience and cyber recovery. And so this is definitely top of mind, and it's become the leading use case for any type of solution that provides protection.
I think it's probably a good way of explaining it. And so you mentioned private cloud, and I know it's an area that you've been emphasizing. So what do you call private cloud? Why not public cloud? Isn't that also part of the equation? What's special about what you've built or you're building to really help with cyber resilience?
So especially, that's a great question about public cloud versus private cloud and why private cloud is so important, right? So with respect to cyber resilience and cyber recovery and cyber protection, cyber attack protection against cyber attacks, private cloud, we believe, offers probably the most secure way to deploy your infrastructure and your application. First of all, enterprises have full control with the private cloud, full control over their infrastructure, their resources. The blast radius is contained because the number of users can be contained and can be controlled by the IT admin and by the enterprise. And thirdly, they have control over the data, which is where most of the attacks aim for. And so we strongly believe that a private cloud done the right way can be the most secure infrastructure compared to a public cloud infrastructure or deploying applications in a public cloud infrastructure. And what we have done with our product, it's called VMware Cloud Foundation, is to build private cloud the right way. And I can talk more about it, but that's really our, sort of our bread and butter here.
Right, so private cloud, it's about control. That's what I wrote down here on my notes.
Control?
Yeah, which I think is very key. So let's talk about, the whole stack, right? You have had historically multiple products. And you've really consolidated the products into maybe one more cohesive platform.
Yep.
So can you walk us through, since you're the running the product management component here, across multiple dimensions, storage, you mentioned storage, compute, I guess the virtual machines, everything, right?
Yep.
What does it take to build a unified platform? Why did you do it? What type of key elements do you want to highlight for our viewers?
Yeah, so I'll talk about two aspects of it. The first is, you're right. I mean, VMware traditionally, even before the Broadcom acquisition, has had industry-leading, market-leading products in different segments. It had market-leading storage product, of course, virtualization. We were the gold standard for virtualization. But beyond that, we were the market-leading solution provider for storage, HCI, hyperconverged infrastructure. We were also the market-leading software-defined networking solution. Now, what we've done is, but a private cloud is just not stitching together manually all these different best of breed products. What we have spent the last couple of years really focusing on is bringing together compute virtualization, which is our core, sort of VMware platform, our storage solution, our networking solution, and our management products into a cohesive whole. And so the product is called VMware Cloud Foundation, and our goal with that is to ensure that our customers have the easiest way to manage and operate a private cloud with the best of breed products across these three components, with the right management layer and with the right automation layer on top of that. And bringing together and stitching it together and gluing it together and providing that private cloud experience that matches, or in some cases exceeds, a private cloud experience, a public cloud experience, is what we have done with VMware Cloud Foundation.
Right. When you think about it, it takes a lot of work and a lot of kind of specialty business. I mean, storage, networking, compute, and then you have all the application stuff that happens on top of it, which we haven't even mentioned. And to provision a private cloud is definitely not necessarily an easy task. So let's double click on what you've identified here, the ease of use and the automation. Do I have to have a PhD in storage or in virtualization to deploy a private cloud?
That's exactly the point of a VMware Cloud Foundation-based private cloud, is that we have built the solution in a way that where our administrators don't need a PhD in either storage or networking, or for that matter, virtualization, right, or management. And so, bringing together these products and delivering it in a way that is simple to use, is easy to manage, easy to operate, and making it the most secure platform has been sort of our effort for the last few years, and the results are showing it as well.
So let's talk about that in the context of maybe an ecosystem. Do you still have all of these relationships with a bunch of other players? If I deploy Broadcom, VMware solutions in my environment as a private cloud, will it play nicely with other APIs? And more importantly, as we double click a little bit more on security, do you have partnerships maybe we should know about?
Yeah. 100%. So we have always maintained a neutral position with respect to ecosystem, VMware, and we continue to do so. So the VMware Cloud Foundation, think of it as a platform. And a platform, of course, VMware has best-of-breed components across compute, storage, networking, management. But that doesn't mean that we don't integrate, as we have always done, with third-party products, storage, networking, and management products, as well as automation products, solutions. And so we maintain an open API model, and we integrate, as we've always done, with an open ecosystem. In fact, we partner very closely with our very broad ecosystem of partners, including the backup partners, and now more recently partnering with with cybersecurity providers as well into our platform.
So let's talk about that in terms of what you've seen in the field and what type of customers you talk to. So now we've talked about, okay, the shifting sands here. It's not just storage or compute or disaster recovery or data protection. It's also cybersecurity. So slightly different personas. Security folks now getting more involved, SecOps, CISOs, not just CIOs. So when you think about some of the customers you've talked to recently, what are they telling you about the platform? And do you have some maybe quick examples, a couple of customers, without necessarily naming them, in terms of how you can scale, how you can deploy, how you can actually put all of these components of automation into metrics for me?
Certainly. So, one of the great things about this NIST framework that we talked about earlier on is that it gives you a framework for of identifying the different components that's required to protect your infrastructure. And what's so great about it is that it also identifies the fact that cyber security in an infrastructure is not just about having the security team involved. It also involves the infrastructure team, and we need to ensure that we bridge the gap between the security team and the infrastructure. It's both their problems. It's not just a security team's problem. And so, as we look at the VMware Cloud Foundation's security initiatives, starting with the core and then expanding out beyond that, we always seek to ensure that it appeals both to the security team, as well as if if an IT team needs to get involved, infrastructure team needs to get involved, we ensure that we include them into our solution building as well. And so we have products and solutions. And just to answer your question about, hey, give me some examples of customers. We have we have products that that detect cyber attacks. We have a solution called vDefend that does IDS, IPF, IPS, distributed firewalling across and we have a large number of customers who deploy these to secure their environment and their VMs in a granular manner. We have a large number of customers doing that, and the combination of that, along with the fact that we can now recover if there was an attack, if the cyber attack went past that and it went into the system, we have mechanisms we have a solution that leverages immutable snapshots, as we just talked about, but does a lot more than that. It does behavior analysis and ensures that we provide a clean room to secure the data and to be able to recover this data. So we have customers that have bought into the entire portfolio of our cybersecure solution space.
So I think it would be fair to say, okay, so you do infrastructure hardening. I think we've covered that. You provide security that's actually pretty broad across the infrastructure, and I like what you just mentioned about the sort of the testing ground or the white room or whatever you want to call it.
Clean room, yeah.
Clean room. There are so many different terms for it. It used to be called a sandbox, but it's not fun and games anymore.
Some people call it IRE as well.
Yes. So it did got many things, but I would like to double click on that and put that in the context of connecting the teams and the processes. And here's what where I want to go with this. Clearly, having the ability to test a recovery or to go look for anything suspicious in a snapshot or a backup, for lack of a better term, maybe leveraging some of the backup vendors you work with, in an environment that's going to be clean, that's going to be disconnected from production, well, it really gives you an advantage for recoverability. I think there's no question about that. So I think that's the first point. The second point is, how many of your customers use it today to really train? Because it seems to me that the practice piece is really what matters. Do you see people, the security folks, calling on the infrastructure folks to run those tabletop exercises or actual recovery exercises?
It's a very good question. In fact, I was skeptical about this as well. And in fact, when we released this, the recovery aspect of our portfolio, that I just mentioned, I was asking the same question. Hey, will customers actually, it's a lot of work to test and to be able to simulate things that go wrong and to be able to recover. What surprised me was that a majority of customers actually have now got into a practice of testing this on a quarterly basis, or at least on a bi-yearly basis, whatever, twice a year, right? And we see this all the time, is that customers, they want to not just have a checkbox that says that I'm protected, but actually want to be able to prove to themselves that they're protected. And so we have many customers doing a quarterly test. Previously, what used to be a DR test is now a full sort of a run book for cyber recovery, right?
Yeah. So the process has changed. The run book has changed.
Yep.
The ingredients maybe have changed a little bit, but the coordination is key. So it brings up the obvious question I haven't asked you yet. We somehow were able to talk for almost 20 minutes now without saying AI in the conversation. So I'm going to say it now. I imagine you're going to be leveraging a lot of ML already, but also probably looking at AI as a type of technology or set of technologies to help build up the solution, making it more cyber resilient. Can you walk us through some of your initiatives and roadmap as much as you can share?
Yeah, I mean, so AI is sort of in every aspect of what we do, or we're looking at how to leverage AI in every aspect of what we do. And one of the coolest areas that we are excited about is cyber security, right? Only because it's a very tough field to understand, right? I mean, the alerts and the alarms that you get from these threats, it could be overwhelming for anyone Even a PhD could be overwhelming for a PhD, a person with a PhD. And so one of the things that we have done is we've introduced this this solution, called a feature called Intelligent Assist, which sort of scans all the alarms and alerts that you get from our vDefend product and makes sense out of it. For our, so you can ask simple queries, say what's happening with my infrastructure. I got this alarm, and then it tells you sort of in a simple way what's happening. But it doesn't end there. And what's really cool about it is that once you have identified that something has gone wrong, with some simple English language queries and commands, you can set policies to protect against that.
Right.
And so we've used AI there, and I'm just giving you one example of what where we used AI. The other area that we're looking at is kind of interesting, is that AI is best at identifying patterns and making sense of those patterns. And so as we look at encryption events, and as we look at things that may an attacker may do to our infrastructure, we're looking at ways to monitor the incoming traffic, the incoming data, so that we can make sense of the patterns that we see across our different users, and to be able to identify and detect if there's a threat, if there's an attack that's happening. So we can provide early warning signs, and we can cordon off our infrastructure. I'm just giving you two examples of areas that we're looking at, but this area is ripe for innovation, and we are all in on this.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like with all of the components that you're looking at, monitoring, starting to leverage automation, Gen AI. I mean, I haven't seen it yet, but I'm sure at some point you'll be able to say, please produce some sort of recovery process for me here, given what we're observing.
Recovery process. Give me a report on on the state of the of my infrastructure. There's a lot of things that that's possible now with AI.
Perfect. And again, this is in the context of a private cloud with full control.
It's only possible in a private cloud.
Only possible. Okay, well, you heard it here. So, look, we've covered a lot of ground. What recommendations or advice would you have for our viewers? What would you tell them they need to do next after watching this segment? So
my advice for anyone looking at in charge of infrastructure is think of cyber security as a holistic problem. It's not a point problem, right? It's not about network security. It's not about storage security. It's the infrastructure security, and in that context, you have to look at it holistically, and find the right solution. That sort of takes into account the end-to-end nature of cyber attacks, and so that's one. And also, as you look at infrastructure, keep in mind that public cloud is great, but private cloud is where you have the most control and control and management, right? And so you can make your private cloud, more secure than your public cloud if you wish to do so, and we provide the tools for that. And so take a look at us.
Perfect. Well, I mean, controlling your environment, providing cyber resiliency and business resiliency as a consequence or an outcome with private cloud. So thank you, Vijay, so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
And to our viewers, stay tuned for more on cyber resiliency. My name is Christophe Bertrand, Principal Analyst here at theCUBE Research. Stay tuned.